Hello Kinder Longevity Lifestyle Designers, this is Zach here, secretsoflongevity.com. So the topic of this video isn't particularly focused on health, it's very cosmetic, but if we realize that if something's going on in our body and genetically, in terms of whatever race you come from, if your ancestors had a lot of facial hair from pictures, from relatives you knew or know, and you don't, that could be indicative that there was some sort of deficiency during your development, or perhaps you're still going through that period in your life where you're developing through puberty and it's just not in the same potency, the amount of hair you have, body hair, facial hair, etc. So that should raise alarm bells. So although the focus of this video is to grow more facial hair, we're looking at it from the standpoint of how can we optimize our health and our hormonal potency so that better reflects our genetic potential, or what we're supposed to have going on in our body due to our genetics. So looking back at my family history, my father, my grandfather, both sides of my family, and extended relatives, pictures from way back when pictures were black and white, and great-great-grandparents, things like that, I see facial hair, and obviously the old pictures aren't going to show body hair, but my dad has chest hair, my brother even has chest hair, and he's younger than me. I grew up and I was vegetarian from a young age, and it actually very much stunted my facial hair growth, and I actually developed little to no chest hair. You've probably seen pictures of me working out without a shirt on in the past. I don't wax my chest. I've got a little bit of hair around my nipples, but I don't have dark hair on my chest. I have like very light hairs, but not dark coarse hairs like underarm hair or pubic hair. And the odd thing is I have tons of leg hair. It's basically almost like I'm wearing a pair of pants from the waist down. Okay, that might have been a bit too much information, but it's not quite that extreme. But facial hair for me also hadn't been developing, and to be honest, I couldn't care less if I had facial or chest hair or not. But for me, facial hair, the lack of it, was something that was always at the back of my mind, kind of tapping away there as I was vegetarian and even getting to veganism and raw foodism, and my hair was just not growing. There was obviously some hair that grew, and I'm going to actually show some pictures like before and after, but more of a series. And we're going back as far as a little over 5 years ago with these first pictures. And what you'll see is, although I never actually let it grow out so you could see it like this, but when I did try to grow it out, it was thinner in the places that I did have it, and there was definitely a lot more patches that weren't filled in. And even to this day, I've been consuming meat, raw dairy, and a lot more animal foods since transitioning out of raw veganism 2.5 years ago. Even more than that at this point, it's almost 3. I started eating meat about 2 years ago, but I was eating more raw dairy and eggs and things like that about 3 years ago. At that point, it started to come back, and it still is getting thicker. So I'm getting it in higher patches. Just comparing photos from literally the beginning of the spring this year, there's a slight difference in how elevated the hairs are growing out of. So I do trim my beard. You can see I don't have it on the neck, and I do trim it along here, and I trim a little bit in here, and that's just to keep it shapely. But if I were to let it all grow out, it would actually look quite different from if I had let it all grow out many months ago. So it is starting to creep up here, which is good. It's what I wanted. And number one thing I attribute this to is raw dairy. I went through a period of not having it for a long time, basically the last half year, and I started consuming it again at the very end of the summer, and I've noticed already a shift in terms of the coarseness, how fast it grows, having to trim it more frequently. And I'll get into more things about the food and stuff and herbs that you can take to help facial hair growth along. But first we're going to look at some pictures. So this first picture I'm about to show you was right after I got out of high school. I had just got my first laptop computer. That was my own computer, and I was just playing around with the webcam, and this was a picture I took. And as you can see, I did actually have a little bit of facial hair growth. It was just maybe like, probably not a full week, but it was very slow growing at that time, and you can see it's just basically there, just sort of a little bit of the mustache and then a bit around here, but there was none of this connecting parts. There was no thickness. I didn't have as much on my neck, And that just kind of shows where I was at that time. And since I had just gotten out of high school, I was 18. I should have been, obviously not necessarily finished puberty, but I should be well into puberty at that point. And the amount of facial hair I had then just did not compare. When I look back at my brother, who was 5 years younger than me at the same time period, he had about this much facial hair. And my brother was omnivore right up until well past being finished high school. He's actually now vegetarian, but he has a full beard. And that's his choice, and I don't think it's going to necessarily detract from his beard, because he's already gone through that crucial stage where the animal foods and cholesterol he was consuming really amped up the necessary hormones in order to produce that amount of facial hair. These next two pictures are two pictures from a trip I took to Egypt, just one or two, maybe it was 2 years after that last photo. And as you can see in these pictures, there's still the facial hair. It's a little trimmer in the first picture, like I'm just more freshly shaven. But in the second picture, I had a little bit more growth on my chin, and again, there's still very little connecting stuff. So I'm right in the middle of being vegetarian, and I stayed vegetarian and even went into veganism, raw veganism, shortly after this trip. These next two pictures are from a similar time frame, but they're from two different events. The first one was, I was taking a picture of myself in the airport. I was going to Mexico for a conference, and it doesn't show, I don't know how well it's going to show up, but maybe on the highest HD setting you'll actually see. I had been developing a little bit more, more hair in this area, and that was still vegetarian, but you know, as I'm getting older, at that time, the body does want to start producing more facial hair just due to DHT slowly rising throughout life. And then in the second one that I'm going to show in a second, you're not going to see much, but it's just a frontal view from that time period. Next, we're going another year or two ahead, and I had already started to implement eggs, and I believe I was more open to consuming raw dairy on occasion when I could get a hold of it. And this was on a trip to Alaska, showing all these pictures of me traveling. And you can see sort of in here I was getting a little less patchy, still very patchy, but the stubble was coming in around this area. Fast forward another almost 2 years, maybe a year and a half. I'm not sure the exact timing of that. Actually, it was a full, almost 2 or 3 years later. I'm doing a photo shoot for this burlesque thing I did, and you can see with my the shot here, you can see that there is a lot more development and sort of connecting stubble through this area. It started to connect sort of the mustache down to the chin area. And I still wasn't growing facial hair out in this way. So even if we were just to compare this next photo to the previous photo, which they were exactly a year apart, you can see the big difference in the amount of hair that had grown in just in this whole area. So that was something that I'd always had very patchy. It was fine through here, but it was all this stuff through here that was not filling it. And finally, here's a picture of me just from a few days ago when I was down in Niagara Falls. And you can also click the link here if you want to check out a vlog I did of my trip down there with some family and some family friends. So as you see, this progression really picked up when, if we were to go back a year and a half ago, when I first started eating meat, it really sped up. So I was eating meat at that, I basically just started it for a few months when I had that burlesque shoot. And in that 1 year period, I've developed to this point where I actually have facial hair I can grow out and I'm actually comfortable with. And I've had people tell me it looks good, it might not to others. Facial hair isn't for everyone. You could have a ability to grow a great beard but just simply not want to. I'm not necessarily going to keep it forever. But that's just something I've acknowledged as being a sign that what I'm doing is working in terms of my own health and vitality, hormonal health. And I really do feel quite strongly that the thing that was holding me back and possibly damaging me the most was this very strict vegan raw food regimen. Now, there's going to be people who eat raw food and be like, oh, look at all my facial hair. It's like, yes, but what were you doing when you're developing? It was through that developmental stage. If there's a lot more people doing raw foodism, vegetarianism, veganism at younger and younger ages, we see people really hampering the normal processes of life. So that big one being around the age of puberty. Are you really limiting all this very nutrient-dense, very fortifying, hormonal building foods at that crucial time period? It's really unwise in my opinion, and what we see just simply from the way hair is built in the body or created is through protein, so you need plenty of extra protein, but also the cholesterol ramps up the hormones. If it works well for you and you can handle it, raw dairy is excellent because it raises DHT levels, and DHT is very implicit in hair growth, and adding body hair, adding facial hair. It is going to be a problem if you have balding in your family and you want to inhibit that. You don't want to be raising DHT because that will possibly cause or begin a receding hairline. That's up to you what you want to do. If you keep your hair short anyways, that might not be an issue. And then you just go with the Jason Statham look or something. So that is by far the number one thing is raw dairy. You could also throw in colostrum in there if you wanted the more IGF-1 boosting element. The next thing that is probably the most profound herb or food to take in to help stimulate hair growth would be elk antler velvet. There's been a lot of testimonials, and take it as you will, these are just anecdotal evidence. There's been a lot of people reporting how it's actually increased the growth of their facial hair. This goes along with some of the interesting things women have reported of like return of periods or the regulation of their menstrual cycle if they were slightly amenorrheic. Or there's actually been some reports of women who have just ended menopause, gone into postmenopause, and they actually had the return of their period. That seems shocking and unbelievable, but it's a very interesting and complex supplement. And if you have a deficiency of facial hair because of some hormonal reason, it could bump that back into alignment. Of course, you have to take genetics into account here. Native Americans, or the indigenous of Native America, have little to no facial hair. They just simply, their genetic ancestry, if you look at the Mayans, any of the tribes, if they haven't had intermixing of genetics, they have very little body hair, very little facial hair. And then when you consider people from Asian origins, they have very thin facial hair that's not as thick. And that's where the indigenous populations originally came from. So they came up around that land bridge when it was in place. But if you come from heritage that has very rich facial hair and you don't have it, then that is a sign. But again, if you're from one of those cultures that has less of it, then disregard this information. But you might have signs of other things that could be indicative of low testosterone, low DHT, etc. Something to really give you the necessary minerals to build hair, just hair in general, is nettle leaf. Not nettle root, because nettle root will block the change of free testosterone to DHT, which we don't want to block, unless there's a specific reason you need to do that. And the nettle leaf has the silica. Has many other minerals as well, but the silica is very building to the hair and nails. So is silica from horsetail. Nettle leaf is my preferred one just because it's you can do it in higher quantities for longer without negative side effects. Horsetail is not actually a tonic herb. Well, not many people actually realize that. You shouldn't take it for too long. There's also oat straw. So I'll actually put a link below for those 3 herbs, which you can rotate without the issues that would come from just sticking to horsetail. Oat straw and nettle leaf are very tonic, and you can use those quite proficiently for a long period of time. I mean, there's tons of foods with high in silica. Any fruit or vegetable with a shiny part to it, so cucumbers, peppers, Swiss chard, are rich in silica because they have that shiny, almost like sheen to them. That's indicative that there's silica in that food, in that part of the food. And of course, you have your meat and eggs. Consume these in ample amounts, whatever works for you. It could be just a small amount, happens to be the thing that really gets your mojo going, or it could be adding in a lot because you've gone through a period of intense deficiency of these nutrients. That's sort of what I've been doing the last year or two, is really ramping up the intake of foods that are much more building to my bodies, my tissues, my hormones, etc. So many of the things I've talked about you can find in the links below. The elk antlers, that key one. There's also the herbs for the silica. You can also get pasture-raised animal foods like meat and even some cheeses, raw cheeses. And also let me know in the comments below what your experiences have been if you're talking about facial hair in regrowing it or getting it to come back if you hadn't had much when you went through puberty. Or if you're a woman, talk about your feelings about facial hair in general. We'll be doing an equivalent video for women on nail and hair health. It's obviously going to apply to men too, but we're going to try and keep this balance of videos for both men and women happening when I do videos on these type of topics. So with that, take care and embrace life without limits.